All right. Well, again, hello, everybody. Thanks for coming to NWSA's webinar series for October. Today, we are pleased to have with us several members of the Poudre Wilderness Volunteers that are going to talk to us about their journey with the media. An interesting look at how a small, fairly large organization, but all volunteers, was able to tap into the media to share their story and to generate local public support, both for their activities on the ground and for donations to further those activities into the future. So with us today, we have Dave Cantrell, who is our program chair for NWSA. He's also a Poudre Wilderness Volunteer member extraordinaire. And he's going to introduce our two speakers today, Jeff Ronda and Sean Ormer. So Dave, go ahead and take it away.
Sure thing. It's always a pleasure to have this joint membership where I'm both a local volunteer in Front Range, Colorado with Poudre Wilderness Volunteers, and also on the board of the National Wilderness Stewardship Alliance. So not a lot of introduction that's needed. Two friends, Jeff Ronda and Sean Ormer, who were instrumental in getting some good from a very bad fire and finding ways to tell the story of the fire and what we learned from it. So I'll just turn it over to you guys.
Okay, and before we have Jeff start, I just would say that we'll have about 30 minutes of presentation, description of some of the activities that went on, and then we'll open the floor for a conversational dialogue, questions and answers with our panelists and with ourselves. So we really like to explore this whole idea of how organizations, wilderness stewardship groups, can better get their message out into the media and better work with the media to get those messages across, especially about wilderness and wilderness stewardship, which we know is that knowledge is lacking in a lot of people. And so this is a good way to learn about it. So Jeff, let's go ahead and take it away.
Thanks, Dave and Randy. And just a bit of more of an introduction. Sean Ormer is our contemporary leader of our social media platform, whereas I'm more the person who deals with what I call traditional media. So we are a 50-50 tag team and really externally touching the world outside of our PWV organization. So we'd like to share with you today, at the request of Randy and Dave, as we've entitled it, Our Journey with the Media. And we've been at this for a couple of years, so we don't claim to have all the answers. All we want to do is share what we've learned and experienced the past couple of years. So you're not talking to a consulting group, you're talking to a bunch of volunteers who love the outdoors. The agenda are these 5 points that you're looking at, and the first 3 we're going to go through pretty quickly, but it helps kind of lay the foundation for our discussion. And we want to spend more time around the interaction and lessons learned. There's also going to be some photographs and some videos we want to share. And I'll jump right to a lessons learned. As you look at this picture to your right, that's a couple of us talking to the reporter from ABC Denver who showed up to do a story about our workday. And I told the guy, wear boots and bring water. What they do, they wore tennis shoes and brought no water. So we had to scramble to help take care of our friends from ABC. So that's the story of that picture. PWV, several folks may be aware of us. We love our motto, hike and ride with a purpose. Our members either have 2 legs or 4 legs. So that's kind of our backstory. We're a 100% volunteer organization. We have no paid staff, located in northern Colorado, founded in 1996. There's no paid memberships. All of our money is generated by donations, and basically we're an extension of the Forest Service. There's about 300 of us. We cover miles of trails, either patrolling and helping the public through education, and we also remove trees, weeds, build rock walls. So we patrol and we restore trails. We do track our hours. Ever since 1996, we're about 370,000 volunteer hours, which the Forest Service equates about $10.5 million in value back to them. That's a quick snapshot of PWV. Cameron Peak Fire was, maybe for lack of a better word, but that was the ignition point for us to get involved with our journey with the media. It grew beyond anyone's wildest expectations, if you will, but it grew to almost 209,000 acres. You can see the picture on the right, and almost bordered up against Rocky Mountain National Park. It burned for 3.5 months due to high winds. 122 miles of trails were impacted. And per the Bear report, 41 miles are severely burned. So this was a big, big deal for really the state and beyond. And that really kind of helped us to say, what do we do about this? We need some help. And so I'm going to show you a video clip, which probably tells the story better about the Cameron Peak Fire than my previous slide, and a bit of a backstory on it. After the fire, CBS Denver did a documentary on the fire, and they had 5 different stories that were relevant to the fire, including impact on wildlife, impact on water, impact to businesses. But they selected us to do a story of one of their vignettes around trail restoration. And Randy may have mentioned in the introduction that email is that this darn reporter won an Emmy for his documentary, and we were awarded an Emmy on this video. So it kind of helps set the tone for our conversations.
It's still a beautiful piece of nature up here. It's just been impacted by the fire.
Just a year ago, more than 200,000 acres of Colorado's outdoor oasis went up in smoke.
It was almost apocalyptic, seeing the blood red skies in the morning and ash raining down and pine needles.
Pine needles from thousands of trees left toppled across trails, making them impassable.
It burned the trees, and a lot of the trees, when it burned, it also burned some of the ground structure underneath, which causes some water to damage the rest of the trail.
Damage that, if not addressed,
All right, let's find a couple pieces of equipment to take up, guys.
would shatter hundreds of miles of pathways through serenity.
We'll do single file.
Years ago, the Forest Service was depleted,
Right now, I think there's 2 actual wilderness rangers that are left on the district.
leaving cleanup and reclamation of the beloved trails
That might work.
to Bob Manuel and the Poudre Wilderness volunteers. Seemingly every weekend this summer,
This is a really kind of a nasty one.
dozens of volunteers made the trek up a new path, clearing thousands of trees
There we go. That's what I'm after.
and restructuring dangerously faulty trails.
Fire loosens up the rocks. It heats the ground on the rocks and heats the ground around the rocks, and then you'll get rocks that just slough off. It's pretty much a tragedy. If you think how beautiful this trail was prior to the fire and what it is now.
The extent of it is, almost unimaginable.
Just 1 year ago,
We watched everything burn and all of our favorite trails and whatnot burn.
volunteers watched, knowing they would have to give back to the land they loved.
For a year like last year, they need as much help as they can get.
Even just being out here for a couple hours, I have a whole new appreciation for what goes into trail maintenance and just the things that I take for granted, and that everyone who visits Colorado and lives in Colorado don't necessarily see all the work, all the engineering planning that goes into just having a trail, and that's without a massive fire ripping through.
For years to come,
We're just about done.
remnants will remind of the devastation the Cameron Peak Fire left behind.
But this is a little different when the ash is still fresh and you can still, you touch the trees and it rubs off on you.
Thanks to the volunteers of today,
We try to make sure that it's going to withstand the test of time also.
generations of the future will get to fall in love with this sloping serenity. Following the dirt path, twisting and turning along the scarred mountainside, every cleared and restored mile of trail unveils promise of new life.
We hope this is a 1 in 1,000 year type of thing. But with climate change the way it's going, we never know what's going to happen.
So we staged this with CBS around a public work day. So the spokespeople there, Bob Manuel is a PWV volunteer, but the rest of the people on the trail are public volunteers that are not PWV members. So to hear them speak from the heart like that, I think was pretty cool and pretty powerful. So last kind of bit of information before we get into our interaction and lessons learned is just to ground ourselves a bit on the background of how we started to engage with the media. After the fire, it was such a severe burn, we needed more money to help either rebuild trails or hire crews to come out and remove trees. So we launched a GoFundMe campaign, and we've never had to do this ever. And so in talking to the director of public relations for New Belgium, I said, well, how do we handle this? She goes, just jump into the deep end. Don't overthink it. So we reached out to every print, really every traditional media outlet in the state of Colorado and Wyoming. And ironically, we kind of learned that most of these folks were unaware of us. So then we had the education component to consider. We also have the platform that Sean leads around social media. So we had to kind of think through how we manage that. And at this point, Sean, you may want to just help people understand how PWV approaches the use of social media, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, so social media was a bit of a tricky point initially because it wasn't something that we were using yet. Not really. I mean, we had a Facebook account, we had a Twitter account that hadn't been used in years. And so we didn't really have a sense of who our audience was yet. And so when we were initially planning our GoFundMe campaign, we were thinking that we would, be doing like a constant dashboard and checking in and building up a lot of hype. And when we actually did some of our initial posts about the campaign, we found that the actual interest there wasn't necessarily as strong as we would have anticipated. So we kind of moderated how much we were sharing about the campaign while it was going. And then we had to be really sensitive as we were sharing things during and post campaign as to who our audience was, and make sure that it wasn't just about us and just kind of talking into a vacuum, but how could we share information? So if we had a public workday, for example, the workday wasn't about PWV, but it was about what we would be accomplishing and how it would then kind of turn back into the work that we're doing and repairing those trails that ultimately are what people care about. So we always want to go back to that kind of informing and educating with our posts. And making sure that what we're sharing is valuable both to members internally as well as external people who have found us as we've kind of grown over the last year.
Super, thanks, Sean. That was a key component of kind of launching the GoFundMe campaign. The goal was $25,000, and because Camera Peak Fire was such an impact to everybody, we hit 92,000. 33 cities across our state, people contributed from, and through our network of members, we reached out to other folks outside of Colorado, and they stepped up across numerous states. So that kind of threw us into the deep end, and then we had to figure out where do we go from here. The cool thing, we were very humbled by the response. Every outlet did at least one story on us. And this slide kind of describes the number of TV stories that were done, the number of radio stations that were asked to cover a story, and they did. From the print side, either magazines or newspapers contributed more than once. And one of the cooler stories, you can see where I talk about Le Monde, which is the largest publication organization in France. They reached out to us, and we were included in a story on the impact of fires to the rivers in the western part of the US. And frankly, from being from Indiana, when you have a French reporter on the phone, and our river is called Cache le Poudre, which I cannot pronounce, to have her pronounce that in French for me was just delightful. I think I had her do it 3 times just so I could enjoy it. It just showed you the reach of the fire and the reach of us pushing our word out. Who would have thought that a French newspaper would have called us? Another kind of key point too is we talked to our contemporaries. So 4 other nonprofits who compete for dollars, frankly, did stories on us and made contributions to this effort. And Sean talked about how she leveraged social media. The picture to the right's kind of fun. This is Rachel Schneider from Fox News. This was her second time out to do a story. And we'd asked her, can we interview you? And she goes, well, that's the first time that's ever happened to me. So it's all about building relationships with the media. So our interaction, there's 2 elements to come our discussion here is what do we do during the campaign? And this probably was our most grounded amount of work is we spent a lot of time developing the messaging. Why do people care? And this is probably important for anything you do when you're reaching and trying to expand your brand. And that's why it's highlighted in green. We spent hours on this, and it's harder than you think. The media likes to deal through either a media release or a press release. So we had a standardized 1-pager with a quote from our restoration leader and a quote from our Forest Service ranger. But with each media release, I attached a personalized note going into a little bit more detail. Each outlet had a different approach. Some wanted to zoom, some wanted just a little bit of edit help on their story, and some wanted to come out to the trail. So you really need to listen to kind of how they want to approach their story. What's important too, we learned we need to pick specific spokespersons depending on what the situation is versus just me or Sean. I'll go into that more into lessons learned. We treated every media outlet as a special person. So if we had a 1 work day, we only had 1 media outlet there versus multiple. And that was a key learning for us as well. These media folks can get videos, they can get photos, they can get fire impact information, but the more you can provide them, the faster they can respond and the more you can kind of own the message you want to send. PWV has a photo video team and numerous editions of our photos and videos were used in the stories. And staying in front of these folks too. So during the course of really it turned out to be 5 or 6 weeks, there was current communication with the media on what we're doing. Post-campaign. And before I go into that, the fun story about the picture on the right, we had a public work day on Father's Day, and Fox News came out to do a story on the restoration. And ironically, the picture of the father and the son, they happen to be doing a work day. So I whispered to the Fox News reporter saying, hey, this is a Father's Day. Why don't you interview the dad and the son? And she did, and it made the clip that evening. So it's all about being aware of your surroundings and how do you leverage fun stories for the media, no matter if it's a campaign or any sort of interaction. So post-campaign, we continue to provide updates on our progress. The number of trees we removed and trails we opened up was staggering. So we provide that information with the media. And some post-fire stories occurred because of that. Sean and I built a plan to stay in touch after this campaign kind of went dormant. And we learned also internal communication is very important. So we spent some time communicating with the PWV membership and friends and family at PWV about the progress we're making with the media. So that was kind of the whirlwind interaction with the media during the course of the campaign. Lessons learned, I want to show you one more clip. I have a couple slides, but I want to set up this clip. This is Fox News, and it's Rachel again. And this is the very first live TV come to a trail clip that we did, and I want to share it with you, and then I'm going to talk to you how I humbly learned something. So bear with me as I launch into this.
Well, this is Highway 14, one of the main roads leading into the heart of the area burned by the Cameron Peak fire. And a group of volunteers is now trying to raise money, hoping to repair and reopen some of the popular hiking trails that were damaged by the fire. And if that doesn't happen, the damage could get even worse. On a Sunday afternoon in spring, the Roaring Creek Trail would normally be full of hikers, but the Cameron Peak fire changed a lot around here.
Most of the trail tread is lost right here.
Matt Cowan with the Canyon Lakes Ranger District took us inside this closed-off area. Trees are still charred, trails and bridges are at risk of disappearing for good.
These are where we're really concerned about those erosion impacts and having that trail infrastructure literally wash away.
Cowan says the fire burned this area so badly it stripped the vegetation and roots from the soil, meaning any moisture from snowmelt or rain could be catastrophic.
We won't be able to find that trail anymore, and it's going to cost a lot more money to rebuild in the end. If we don't take care of those mitigation measures.
That's why the Poudre Wilderness volunteers are stepping in to help, setting up a GoFundMe to raise money for repairs and reopen as many trails as possible by this summer.
This is the first time we've ever done a crowdfunding campaign just because of the severity of the fire and the need for resources.
The money will mainly go to labor and lumber to build things like bridges and retaining walls, keeping water from destroying these trails.
This is really valuable trail infrastructure that millions of people enjoy every year, and we want to keep providing that opportunity.
There are more than 120 miles of trails within the burn area. Cowan asks people to please respect any trail closure signs and check the status of the trail before you head out. We do have information on that GoFundMe over on our website. In Larimer County, Rachel Schneider, Fox 31.
So Rachel called and said, I need to see you guys because ABC had just launched their first story the day before. So I think the arms race started with the TV stations. So she raced up to see us and she showed up at 4 o'clock and said, boys, I have a half an hour. And that, once we got her involved with the burn area, she showed up at 4 and that news story was aired at 9 o'clock that night. The learning for me as a person swimming in the deep end was Matt Cowan and I met before she showed up and planned what we were going to do. And I fully intended to really start pitching the GoFundMe campaign. And she showed up and said, I want to interview Matt Cowan first. And so this is the first time I really listened to him talk about the impact of the fire. And when I heard him talk about erosion and the future and the amount of work to rebuild these trails, I changed my strategy. I didn't talk much about GoFundMe. I said, everything that she's going to ask me, I'm going to talk about supporting the Forest Service. And the surge in donations after that clip was strong. But my lesson learned is you better adjust when you need to adjust based on what's happening with the story. I was totally humbled. And I'm glad that Matt went first. So, lesson learned. Okay, a couple slides on lessons learned. What was really fun to watch is that every single reporter was engaged with our people. It was kind of people dealing with people. They were interested. They weren't in a rush. They were engaged. Also learned that they move extremely quickly. I guess it's common sense to know they're deadline driven. But during the campaign, you have to be at the ready with any sort of reach out, whether it be through your phone, email, or whatever it may be. You have to be able to respond quickly. And I think we were overwhelmed during the course of this campaign with the amount of communication with all the outlets and then trying to balance delivering to them what they needed and trying to meet their deadlines and their stories. Everyone had a little bit different angle. They just weren't talking about burned trees or repairing a bridge. They may have had an interest in wildlife. They may have had an interest in what's it going to take, how long is it going to take. So really engaging with the outlet on what they're trying to talk about, and then we help provide the information. we learned this as we kind of went along too, is you definitely have to have a variety of people who will engage with the media. And the example I would use is that you saw the CBS clip, and that was Bob Manuel. When ABC came, I certainly couldn't have Bob Manuel speak to them. So I had to pick a different, well handpicked spokesperson to deal with a competitive outlet. So you really need to step back to say, who are going to be my spokespeople, and then coach them. And I'll give you an example of coaching. The first Zoom meeting we had with CBS, our restoration committee chairman, who leads really the restoration for all of our efforts, very, very humbling guy, well-spoken. But he happened to say, because we're talking about the GoFundMe campaign, and the reporter said, well, tell me a little bit about your organization. He goes, well, when it comes to money, we're cheap. I said, no, we're frugal, right? So after the Zoom meeting, I told the guy, don't you ever use the word cheap. You really got to pick your words delicately. So you got to be able to coach your spokespeople. Treat them like they're special. When CBS was out, we hauled around their cameras. We helped talk to some of the public workday folks about, would you mind being videoed? Which leads me to be, you need a producer. You need someone like a behind the scenes influencer whispering in the ear of the media person, trying to make sure the angle you want to talk about is delicately put in their ear. And you need one person that the media can reach out to versus several, because that can be very confusing and your message gets disjointed. I'm going to say this again, the ability to have just a stockpile of relevant pictures and videos is really, really helpful. And our video team spent a lot of time during the fire and after the fire pulling these photos together. We have special folders built by media outlets, so we were sure we weren't sharing videos or photographs with competing outlets. So it took a lot of time to make sure we're treating everyone like a special client, if you will. Question came up really around ABC. They donated $15,000 to us, which prompted how do we respond? We talked about a plaque or a gift. At the end of the day, what we learned after talking discreetly to some of these outlets, all they really care about is the scoop and maybe a quick thank you email. And that's where we kind of landed. But we really wanted to send a thank you gift to ABC, and we were told that's not a good idea. This is pretty pervasive when it came to both print and TV, because sometimes you wonder on TV, how many people really watch a news clip during the evening? These reporters are paid and measured on the online response to their story, basically driven by hits. So if you talk to TV folks, they really develop their story around wanting to put it online and driving eyeballs. One point I want to make with the picture on the right, and this is Matt Cowan, our forest ranger, and Dylan Thomas, a CBS reporter. And Dylan called me when he was thinking about doing this documentary and said, I'd like to pull together a documentary on the fire. I'd like to use PWV as a restoration story. What do you think? I said, well, give it a shot. So he did it. And he pulled together, like I said, 5 different stories, but he did 90% of the work. So he called me and said, hey, we've been nominated for a couple regional Emmys, and there's no chance we're going to win because no polish, zero polish. And I'll be darned if he didn't win too. And what we learned, he won one for the documentary, and then ours won a regional Emmy, but it came down to the content versus the polish. So one big takeaway, just make sure your story is compelling, and then you really don't need a bunch of polish.
Can I pop in real quick?
Yep.
So just to, Jeff functioned as our kind of point of contact for our media. And he was, I mean, we were getting texts and emails constantly from him as he was getting all of this input and requests coming in. But having a photo video team that was active, we had folks on different trails on the same day trying to capture information. And even before we had a need, they were starting to put that media into videos and snippets, and having all of that was so valuable as we were going through this process, because if somebody called and asked and said, we need, you know, a video, or we need a batch of photos, we already had them ready, and we didn't have to lose time creating them or searching for them. And content that our own media team collected was used in that Emmy winning video. And so having those volunteers available and creating that content all the time before the ask was a really important way that we kind of were able to keep up with what was going on as it was happening.
Well stated, Sean. And to go along those lines, this team has created a Flickr account. And like I said, we have various folders for each of the kind of categories, be it an outlet or an event, that we can easily go into and cherry pick the photos or videos that we need. And that's the fun thing about the picture on the right with these two guys, is we had our summer party and Dylan showed up for 2 hours to share the Emmy, because without our video team's clips, I don't think it'd been as effective. But here's the relationship with him, and the fact that he showed up and spent 2 hours of his time just hanging with us. And you notice he's wearing jeans, you know, very casual. So thank you, Sean. I can't emphasize this enough. And Sean did a great job of describing it, but we don't want to become an echo chamber. And she does a marvelous job of staging out communications. If you do a specific campaign, probably stating the obvious here, but it can really consume you, and the organization has to be ready to respond. Sean talked about the texts and the phone calls that were flying around. PWV did an excellent job, along with the Forest Service, of just being ready to communicate when we needed to. One aha moment for us is that we were so outwardly focused, sometimes we forgot about telling the organization about what we're doing and what's happening. And so we stepped it up to do a little bit better job in talking internally via email or sharing the media clips, just to maybe over communicate in a way. One thing we're growing into now is we've never had really what we're calling an external branding plan. Is how do we extend outside of just PWV to educate the community and the businesses on what we do. So we have just launched into doing that. But I think without this whole Gofundme and then growing with the media afterwards, I'm not sure we would have done this, frankly. This is highlighted in green because we can talk about the Gofundme all we want, but Sean and I are spending a lot of time now as we kind of build the external branding kind of plan, is how do we remain relevant with the media outlets? And what we've done so far is we tend to provide any updates of what we've done on the trails and the impact of new users using the trails. We also started to talk about other initiatives that PWV has underway, more than just trail restoration. We have a pretty robust program around getting kids outdoors. We are looking at helping some maybe folks that are challenged to get outdoors. So what other initiatives can we tease with the media to help build awareness of programs that we're doing? And finally, I will tell you, I spent a lot of time, where appropriate, staying engaged and reaching out to these reporters, either in something they've done. I was not much of a social media person until Sean trained me, but I've gotten very active on Facebook and Instagram, and I follow all these reporters just with relevant, nice job, or here's what we're doing, but I really want to stay in front of these folks. So a couple of years in dealing with them, and you can see our friends from ABC on the right. And the story here is the executive director called and said, we want to do a story. We want to present you with a check. So we did it during a public work day, and about 40 people were there. He wouldn't tell me how much money. Everyone circled around before the workday started, and the reporter gave us a check for 15 grand. The place exploded. So you talk about good PR with 40 people who are not members of PWV, but will go talk to their friends and family, and maybe even join the organization. So in a fire hose sense, that's it. Sean and I can be reached out for any questions. Like I said, this is the beginning of a journey, and we still have a lot to learn, I would say. Randy, if you're talking, we can't hear you.
Thanks. I clicked it once, but I must have clicked it twice. So anyways, thanks, Jeff. This was really good to give us an insight into how PWV worked with the media in this particular case. We're going to open up the phone lines and video call to questions now. You can either type them into the chat, or you can come online and just raise your hand and we'll recognize you. In fact, if you want to, you can just start your audio or start your videos now on your local machine so we can see who you are and have that conversation as you ask your questions. So I think the first question up that I saw was Jeff and Sean, if you could give us a little bit more about your background and what did you do when you're not working with PWV?
Sean, does age win here? Should I go first or what?
I'll jump in. I've been a member of PWV since 2019. I'm a small business owner. I run a bookkeeping business, and I have no claims of any expertise when it comes to social media. I'm just here as a volunteer doing my best and learning as I go.
All right.
Yeah, I joined PWV in 2020 when COVID hit. So I've been here for a couple of years now. Thoroughly enjoy the organization. 40 years of business to business marketing. So applying some of the skills from doing that in industry has been kind of helpful when it comes to helping build the brand for PWV. And I love the outdoors and passionate about public lands.
All right. Well, while people think of questions and get up the courage to raise their hand, I have a question for you, Jeff and Sean. So could you talk a little bit more about the outcomes of this effort to engage the media? What were the final totals of your GoFundMe campaign, and both in terms of dollars and then number of people impacted, and how does it affected the membership of PWV?
Oh, I would offer some stats. One is exact, and the monies raised were $92,000 with a goal of 25. We recruit once a year. We bring in a new class to be trained really during the first quarter of the year. And the recruiting team saw a surge in people applying is because they saw us on the media. Randy, I cannot answer how many people that was, but it really made the life for a recruiting team pretty easy. The public work days we had 8 of them, and I think we held between 40 and 50 people on each work day during, post GoFundMe. Those work days sold out and we had waiting lists. And what's kind of fun now is a year later, it was the same situation. Fewer work days, but still public interest was there. Half the fun about marketing is which 50% of it can you track, right? So sometimes it's very difficult to pinpoint an ROI, but those are some of the anecdotes that I can share with you.
Mm-hmm.
I can add to this year was one of our largest recruiting seasons, if I'm not mistaken. I think we had the largest number of recruits we've maybe had join, if I'm correct there. And then we already have a really big backlog of folks that are hoping to join next year. So we're trying to adjust we may not need to do much of a recruiting cycle because we've already got a backlog of folks wanting to join as well.
I see one hand up. One more point on that is the fact that we tend to bring in classes of 60-ish people. I think our backlog, well, Sean was just saying, there's 300 people on the list who want to join, which is a whole new dilemma for us, is how do we do that? So.
All right, Phil, it looks like you have a question.
I might have missed this. I had to step out to greet somebody at the door, but the GoFundMe sounded very successful, and the money raised certainly is very reasonable. With an all-volunteer crew, though, the money for labor for bridges and it was some other structure I caught but don't remember. Was that going to Forest Service crews, or did you have contracted crews coming in? Where was it being spent?
Yeah, so we held off on buying lumber because of the price of lumber during COVID. And so really the GoFundMe money is dedicated for the next 2 years. So this year we hired like the Rocky Mountain Conservancy gang to come through. So local young backs that we're aware of. So this year and next, we've already signed up with them. And we're going to go through that money pretty quickly, frankly. We're going to learn. Yeah.
So you're going to contract with some of the youth crews, which is
exactly
good to get those guys out too, of course. So
you answered your question better than I did. Thank you.
No problem. I think it was wonderful, and I caught a little bit around the edges. Fire is always a difficult, challenging thing to communicate about, not only with proposed wildernesses or designated wilderness areas, but especially our proposal for wilderness. It's a complex issue that the general public is easily succumb to messages around fear. And so I'm always really sensitive to listening for those messages that are also supporting the concept that fire isn't just universally destructive. And it's, as you pointed out, Jeff, so well, words are really, really important in finding the precise word. We're frugal, not cheap. And also at times framing fire in terms that are not solely destructive oriented or negative oriented. And I think is probably one of the things you learned out of it, and had some sensitivity too, but I'd encourage everyone on the call to be giving thought to as we message about fire and the impact of our work.
Yeah, and that's a great point. And I think I mentioned earlier, we spent a lot of time talking about that, right? And how do you kind of launch, even asking people for money? And I think we landed on repair your favorite trails, trying to make it personal. We had more money coming out of Denver than we thought we would, because people come up here from Denver. But it's all around you, it's your trails. Hey, versus the fire just crushed, an area. It got very personalized in a positive way versus a negative way.
How did the membership of PWV feel about all the attention that you garnered for the organization?
I think people felt shell shocked because it's never happened before. And that's why I think we learned you really have to have a good internal communication program. And it's 7 times in 7 different ways. And I'll give you an example. Sean and I sent an email out just loving the fact we won this regional EMMY, right? We put the link into it, people got it, we think. And then, a month later, we have our year-end or summer party where the CBS guys showed up. And I had 5 people walk up to me and say, I didn't know we won that EMMY. Can you send me the link, right? So it just shows you internal communication is important with a real kind of an internal plan. I don't know, Sean, how would you answer that? You're kind of more along, or even Dave, kind of perspective on.
I think, because all of his attention was centered around restoration, there was definitely some folks in the membership who said, but our job is patrolling. What about patrolling? Are we losing kind of our core purpose? And so we're having to sort of make sure that we aren't making folks feel that they're being excluded or that our purpose is changing. We just have this kind of immediate urgent need to help these trails before they become so eroded and even more expensive to restore. So there were definitely lots of folks who were really excited, and then other folks who said, whoa, what happened to our organization? This is completely different than what I'm used to hearing about.
Well, it also begs the question, to go back to the number of people who want to join. We're kind of built to run as a 300 or 320 person organization. So it kind of begs the question, do we want to grow into 500, right? It's just the whole unintended consequence of this thing kind of forced discussion, Randy. So
Yeah, having a wait list for an organization is a new concept, I think, that most organizations would find foreign, to say the least. So that's probably a topic for another whole webinar all on its own. But are there other questions from our community here? David?
This is Dave Johnston. I wasn't clear if you mentioned whether or not this was a wilderness you were working in. But if it was, I'm curious about what arrangements or permissions you needed to get from the Forest Service before you were able to go in with your crews and do the work that you're talking about. I guess because it was mainly restoration that you weren't creating anything new, so that probably didn't require any kind of minimum requirements analysis. But the question, I still have the question of whether or not your relationship with the Forest Service is such that you can just say, we're going in, this work needs to be done, we're going in, or whether or not some approval process was necessary before.
yeah, that's a very good point. And there was discussion around that. So we know very well the local marketing communications person for the Forest Service. He was fully aware of where we were going, what we were doing. And it all pivoted around public work days. And there were 1 or 2 forest rangers there at all these work days. So the only coaching we got is don't promote a brand. I mean, a TV station is not a brand, right? But you don't promote a boot brand, don't promote, a soft drink brand. But what the Forest Service really liked is we were getting them publicity that they probably would not gotten done on their own. So when it came to filling out forms, I think if we were promoting Oboe's boots or something, we'd have to fill out a form. But for this, we didn't have to.
From a technical side, from the regulation side, breaking news, of which this would qualify as a breaking news story, does not require a commercial filming permit inside a wilderness. It's an allowed exception. So they would still have to follow and abide by any of the minimum requirements any of the prohibitions on motorized equipment, mechanical transport would all have to be abided by. But there are plenty of film cameras that would be allowable for taking of the video that could be used in these sort of news stories. So Pete, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Randy. Thanks, Jeff and Sean. Maybe a little bit related to David's question, back to a comment I think you made, Jeff, about, you as the organizational point of contact, being prepared and jumping on those contacts that you got and responding to interest. But I think I also heard you say that the Forest Service was a partner in that and was positioned to be responsive. And I wondered if you'd talk a little bit more about that. Was that all on Matt Cowan, or were there other Forest Service folks sort of?
Yeah. So Matt Cowan was our spokesman, but Reagan Cloudman is their PR person for the Canyon Lakes Ranger District. And I over communicated with her. She knew everything beforehand. If there's any quote I put in print, she and Matt read it first. And they appreciated the effort, by the way. And she knows all these reporters too. So we kind of tag teamed it. If I couldn't get some information, she did. But she was fully aware before anything happened. And then when something did happen, she got a copy of it.
Oh, thanks. Appreciate that.
And by the way, as we build our branding program, they're starting to build their own, and we're going to work together on it because really we're their extension.
Yeah, I think David asked before too. So Jeff, most of this work was done in the Cache La Poudre Wilderness, wasn't it? Or in the Cache La Poudre and Comanche Peaks?
Yeah, primarily. Raywall we didn't touch, for the media, but whatever we can get to conveniently, right? We
Right.
didn't want to ask reporters to drive 2 hours and hike for an hour and a half to get someplace, nor do we want public work days to be way up. So
I think David is dealing with situation back east where he's having some difficulties with his Forest Service office about doing work in wilderness. And I just would have hazard to say that your Forest Service office is bent over backwards to help assist PWV in doing work within the wilderness, and making sure all the paperwork is done and the hoops are jumped through in an easy fashion. Is that correct?
yeah, we always consider ourselves an extension of the Forest Service. So we talk to Matt and Reagan all the time and take their guidance.
All right.
With only two rangers, then they need 300 volunteers, right? So it's really kind of a synergistic relationship.
Right. Dave, you got your hand up.
First, to comment on that part and say that we have been fortunate, very lucky over the years to have great liaisons with the Forest Service. We've worked hard to guard and develop those. And that takes time, and it takes willing people on both sides to work with each other. Jeff and Sean, I was mostly going to ask, pretty good sized organization that we are, pretty good sized fire that gave us a clear goal and target for this work. How can groups that don't have the kind of backing of photo teams and such that we do, and that don't have a disaster on the scale of the Cameron Peak fire, can other groups make use of what you've learned with smaller projects?
I think the answer is yes. I think it's, Sean stated it well when we first started working on this, is why do people care? So maybe you don't have a forest fire, but maybe you have some sort of special program that's meaningful to the local community, which will tell a story. I use the word kids in nature, deprived kids getting out, stock programs, whatever's meaningful for the local area. And then you sit down with media and you talk about it. If you can build an engaging story that means something for them. And that's one of our biggest things right now is the fire's done and how do we stay relevant? And that's what we're working on in our expanded plan for branding. But it can fit any size organization if you have a good story to tell about something. Is that enough, Dave? I mean, this is a whole different topic, I guess. It's kind of a workshop, but I firmly believe you don't need a big fire and a huge organization to get this done.
Thanks.
Right. Pete, you still got your hand up. Did you have another question or comment?
No, I'm just a Luddite and don't know how to put it down. Thanks.
Quite all right. I'm sure you got a question in there somewhere.
Well, Pete, I'm a Luddite too. Whenever I have a problem, I call Sean and she fixes it like in 10 seconds. So her email's on the last slide. You can give her a ring.
All right. Well, I just want to, oh, go ahead, Pete.
I was just going to say, Sean could have a second business going to provide savvy services to Luddites associated with other groups.
I won't say it hasn't been considered.
There we go. There we go. We always could use more services for wilderness stewardship organizations around the country. Well, speaking of which, I think we were pretty close to the top of the hour. One last call for any questions for Sean and Jeff. And hearing none, I'm just going to say thank you both for coming and sharing your story. It's how exciting to raise over $90,000 for trail restoration there in the Cache-la-Poudre country, and to also get an EMMY. Wow, that's pretty exciting stuff. So a lot of good work on both of your parts and the whole organization, everybody that was involved in this effort. So, and thanks for coming and sharing today so that other NWSA or member organizations can learn from your experience and hopefully get a chance to go try some of these techniques with the media themselves and work on the messaging in their particular areas. I will say that next month, our November webinar is going to be with several members from Region 2 of the Forest Service. We're going to be talking about the paperwork behind volunteers. And if you've ever wanted to dig in and better understand the reason for the forms, what the forms are accomplishing, and then how they are used to effectively manage the volunteer program, we're going to be doing sort of a volunteer 101 session with members of our Region 2 staff. So thanks everybody for coming, and you'll see that information pop up on our NWSA newsletter coming out at the end of the month. And thanks for joining us today. With that, we'll go ahead and conclude.